Welcome back to the Lift Free and Diet Hard podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Coates. Join me along with industry leaders and friends on a quest to get more people through the gym door and eating and living healthier. Join me where evidence meets empathy while rejecting fitness industry fads and extremism. Let's begin. Dr. Tony Boutagy, it's a real honor to have you on. I've been enjoying your media for a while. You're a PhD of exercise and sports science, and you've got a really extensive history as a university lecturer, an editorial board member, advisory panels for a lot of things, almost too much to actually break it all down. But basically research-based fitness educational entities all across the board. And you've especially recently been collaborating with a lot of the most respected people in the industry on your media, people like Dr. Stu Phillips, Dr. Lauren Colenso-Semple, Dr. Alyssa Olenek, all of whom have been guests on my podcast. I've seen you with Dr. Jen Gunter. Welcome to the show. It's an honor.
Great to be here, Andrew.
Well, thank you. Let's get right into the fun stuff. So you've been active in debunking. I love this. A lot of the wild, unsupported claims, bullshit about women's perimenopausal, post-menopausal health and training. Let's start with this one. I got a lot. What are the common claims that zone 2 cardio isn't as effective for women as for men? Is there any evidence to support that claim?
It's an interesting one. There needs to be a framework that we use when we evaluate claims. And I was not aware that this was a thing until around 2-ish years ago. And I was co-presenting on a course for women about weight loss and fitness. And they all had a time to ask questions, and they did. But many of the recurring questions were, I've heard that zone 2 or lower moderate intensity exercise isn't as good for women, and post-menopausal women in particular. And I had been a coach for quite a while, and I had not heard of this claim, and I went digging and found the source of it. And I thought it's really strange, because if you look across the literature between the diabetic metabolic syndrome literature, where they use moderate intensity steady state, there's no gender or sex differences. There's just improvement in glucose control. And when you look at the training studies that compare HIIT, sit versus moderate intensity steady state, there seems to be improvement across the board, except you get faster improvements in the first few weeks when you do high intensity work. That's consistent with peaking in athletics, which everyone understands in sport. So I couldn't quite get where this argument came from. So I read the article, and there were hyperlinks to the reference. And essentially what the proponent is saying is that women have more mitochondria and are better fat burners, and zone 2 exercise or moderate intensity steady state is developing mitochondria and fat burning capacity. And since you already have this as a female, then you don't need to do it, and you need to rev the engine a little bit more. And I thought, well, that's kind of really odd. We do zone 2 exercise as coaches, or we prescribe it in any number of different ways for different outcomes. But promoting fat burning or just mitochondria is not really on the radar. It's something that we often build a base with, or do in between other days because it's under the radar and quote unquote easy exercise. We like to alternate hard and easy. So I clicked the hyperlink, and it took me to mitochondrial content in the in the livers of mice. I thought, well, this can't be right. And there were a number of hyperlinks, but all of them were to either lactate transporters in mice or mitochondrial content in the liver of mice. That was the evidence. And it wasn't overwhelmingly persuasive.
And I mean, we're not naming, but a lot of the claims that I'm going to go through, they're largely coming out of one individual who has the air of authority and is quite popular. But the common argument is that it's based upon mechanistic data. Now, we can understand mechanisms, but a lot of the debunking has been in presentation of peer-reviewed research across human populations that just doesn't show up these effects. But if we're actually taking loose mechanisms through rodent studies, then all of a sudden the link is pretty tenuous in my mind.
Worse, we've got studies in humans. We've got studies that compare males and females in the response to zone 2 exercise, but we've got it across population groups. And this is why it's a truly bizarre claim, because it's based on physiology, that females are better fat burners. But that's highly individual. Are we talking about a sedentary female, a trained female, a high carb weight training female? I've got female clients who live around 400 to 500 grams of carbs a day and just lift weights. They are carb burners through and through. They're dreadful fat burners. The idea that genetically speaking, a female is a better fat burner and has more mitochondria, it's not an argument to then give a recommendation. Worse, because we actually have the human studies that compared different zones of training. If the person wanted to make an argument to say high intensity exercise is important for those individuals who really just think that the fat burning zone is the best thing to do, and they're going after a population group that runs for hours and hours and hours at very low intensities to burn more fat, then you could make a really strong argument to say, hey, maybe that could form a certain percentage of your training and you could benefit from inserting some high intensity work into there. That would be a great argument. But that's not what the individual is saying. And quote unquote, it's zone 2 training doesn't work for women as it does for men, and then uses a mice study and ignores the human study. So we're not starting from a reputable place for a female, because females trust this person, but that's not great advice.
This episode is brought to you by Macros First. I've always struggled with nutrition tracking apps, even the slightest hassle or friction, and it breaks my habit. That changed with Macros First. When I tried it, I told my friend, the founder, Jacob, quote, this is, well, let's just call it a certain other app on steroids. It's the easiest app to use, and it has a free barcode scanner, which if you use tracking apps, you know this is a really big deal. I recommend Macros First to all my clients and friends, and even had them sponsor my 2024 conference. Here's an example feature I love: auto-calculate food portions. Let's say you've got 30 grams of protein left for the day, and you're thinking, how much chicken breast do I need to hit that? In other apps, you're left guessing serving sizes, hoping you get close to your 30-gram goal. With Macros First, just tell it the target you want to hit, and it tells you exactly how much to eat. No more macro Tetris. Other apps ask, how much do you eat? Macros First also lets you ask, how much should I eat? And while Macros First's premium version is incredible for any user, the basic version, which is nowhere near basic, is free to use. So you can go to either the Apple Store or Google Play to download. Oh, that makes sense. Let's do the claim. I've seen this a lot. It's the same popular influencer claims that women shouldn't train fasted. So again, is there any evidence to support that?
When fasted training became a thing, it was virtually always to give you a greater fat burn. And when you look at the literature that has compared fasted versus fed training, there's clearly a squashing of your fat burning rate. But what most people don't realize is the fuel that you're using in the fasted state, let's call it aerobic exercise, it's astonishingly low. It's like 0.3 grams a minute. It's not a lot. And when you exercise in the fed state, it's negligible, 0.1 grams. Obviously, depending on how fit you are, what that meal was, how long you're going for, you tend to use more fat as you keep going. But as a tool for fat loss, it's not a really incredible tool because the fat use is so small. Then the idea would be for females, it's fine for men, but for females, there's different physiology. And you will, and the first argument was, you will burn more of your muscle and you'll lose muscle compared to men. These studies have been done. We've got year-long studies in time-restricted eating, and we've got a handful of studies that compare fasted versus fed state, comparing men and women. The first thing that we see is that there's no loss of muscle tissue. And the reason for that is muscle synthesis and rebuilding, it's not an hour phenomenon. It's a multi-day phenomenon. So if you exercise for 1 hour and then you eat, it's not like you fuel all of that exercise session coming from your muscle. The body will use fat and carbohydrate before it uses muscle. So that was not a strong argument, and research shows that that wasn't true. The next was that there would be the initiation of relative energy deficiency syndromes or low energy availabilities. And again, if you exercise before breakfast and then eat breakfast, then that little transient 1 hour of 300-400 calories in a 24-hour period is not a big deal. So it doesn't affect bone, it doesn't affect immune system, it doesn't affect hormones, which was another potential argument for women. And then recently it is that it dysregulates appetite. I thought, well, that is an interesting one, because if you exercise before breakfast and then have your meal afterwards, do you go in search of food greater in that day. Now, there's not a lot of data on it, but the citation of support for that came from a mouse study that looked at a neuropeptide called kisspeptin, and it gets dysregulated in mice that exercise in a fasted state. And this is a little bit odd because we've got an incredible amount of Ramadan literature that looks at people exercising in that fasting period. We've got a whole host of metabolic literature in type 2 diabetics who exercise before breakfast to look at glucose control. But recently, we've got a study that directly measured appetite regulation when you exercise before and after feeding, and it shows no appetite dysregulation. So again, with this data out there, they have to resort to the mice literature to make a claim that females need an exclusive set of recommendations, and what works for a male won't work for you. And this is where you hear the claim, work with your physiology, not against it. And it's based on this idea that it will work for a guy, but it won't work for a girl.
I'm going to jump ahead because you alluded to something I want to put right out there plainly. Same person, there's the branding statement. I think this is what it is. It's really about branding. Women aren't small men. They're not just small men, which I think resonates with women because there's something, hey, no, we're different. We're special. It sounds great. It sounds catchy, but I get the impression this is waved around to justify a lot of these very poor and unsupported arguments to build, this house of cards brand identity and these recommendations and books and podcast appearances. Is that in line with what you see as well?
It is an interesting argument. It's clearly branding, and we can all appreciate that. And that's neither good nor bad. We all have brands. But it's the idea that sex differences occur in physiology. That's what that statement means.
Mm.
And there are sex differences in physiology, and no one denies that. It's one of the first things you learn when you study sports science is when you're exercising, what do males and females burn in terms of carbohydrate, protein, and fat? And is there a different thermoregulatory response? Are there different muscle fiber types? There is a whole world of literature exploring sex differences in physiology. What that individual then does is stops there and says, because of those sex differences, you will need to do something different with your exercise, with your sets and your reps and your intensity, with your fueling. And the only way that we know if that sex difference makes a difference is a study measures an outcome of interest. And that could be you compare HIIT versus males and females and look at differences in response, or zone 2, or heavy lifting, or whatever the topic is we're interested in. We look at the literature that has compared males and females. And of course, the literature is incomplete. That's why scientists have jobs. And every year, new data comes out. In fact, every week, new data comes out. And we read that and we try and apply that to the framework, which is, what does science tell us? And secondly, what do best coaches do? I think it's well accepted that high-level coaching is about 20 years ahead of what science is doing. That's a pretty well-accepted number. In other words, if you want to know if there are unique training recommendations, look to top-end coaches who train men and women across the lifespan and across different goals or ability levels. And there's a number of these coaches, and when you speak to them, they won't say, exactly, I've got a male program and I've got a completely different female program because this one works with their physiology because they've got different fiber types. And coaches aren't doing that. And I think that's a smoking gun that perhaps we're looking and really pushing the sex differences in physiology to make a difference in programming to support a brand. And when questioned about this, rather than engaging, this person will usually block and delete comments if there's an opposing viewpoint.
It makes sense that in many realms, bodybuilding is a really good one that a lot of times the bodybuilders have figured things out long before the research has validated what they say. But as you would know quite well, what also happens is there's a lot of bullshit that gets filtered out too, right? Arnold and his contemporaries believed that they were way ahead of the curve on a lot of stuff, but then they believed in the muscle confusion principle, like a lot of Joe Weider's old stuff. It's total nonsense. And so it's an easy justification to say, well, hey, I work with the individuals, the data's there, but there may be some stuff that's brilliant, but maybe it's clouding some bullshit protocols that they're leading heavily on saying, this is what's working. No, it's actually these other things. And the collective of all the things is producing great results, but some of the stuff is overblown fluff. Is that what you've seen?
I agree completely. But I also think when I get the feedback, and I do all the time, is that, well, nothing was working for me and I followed this person's advice and I improved. And when you then look at what was being done, it's, as we mentioned before, there was an over reliance on one intensity
Mm.
and under fueling
Mm.
and a lack of variety, too much monotony. And anyone who is worth their salt as a coach would have a look at that and say, well, there's too much of the same kind of stimulus and the body is no longer responsive. You could have done anything. You could have gone higher reps or lower reps. You could have gone faster or fartlek training or sprinting, you name it. The very fact that there was variety inserted was enough to kickstart those mechanisms. And that's why coaches will look at the literature and smile when you see this compared to this had no difference in a 6-week study. Coaches will say, right, we try and alternate these variables with regularity. And I've got good friends who are science-based. So there's no such thing as periodization. It's a waste of time. In the coaching world, no coach would ever say that at any level of performance because there's something you can't capture in a 6 or 8 week study. And I really feel that that's when a female is frustrated, and I understand that nothing is working for me. And you look at the program, it's not well designed. And by simply inserting more HIIT work or always doing 15 reps and now doing 5 reps, you will get a training response. And it's just the variation and not so much the specifics.
Probably explains there's a little bit of a curveball, but some of the claims about how when people switch to the popular low volume training and then low repetition training to near failure. And I mean, I will argue the end of the earth, like there's a lot of practical problems with that logic, but the proponents will say, I switch to this and I've got the best results ever. It probably could be explained by the same phenomenon you just said.
Agreed. And this is why it's important to look at the long-term big picture. If you put a short-term change, and it's usually you dissipate a lot of the volume, which was masking your performance because of the accumulated fatigue, you will see an immediate jump up. The question is, will you see the same linear increase in performance over 6 months? And we're hearing the praise of, well, for the last 3 or 4 weeks, my performance has never improved as much. It's because you got rid of all that volume. But this is the same aspect with interval training versus steady state. No one in coaching just suggests you do one zone of training. You will always vary these depending on what your goal is and your recovery and your stress levels and how much time. There's a lot of things that go into program design. But by simply adding interval training and your performance improves, that's right. But are you now going to just do interval training all year round? And the answer is, of course you're not, because the fatigue is going to be so great that you will need more time off training. And that is the very antithesis of what we want as coaches, which is to never stop training.
Couple quick notes. You alluded to some stuff earlier. You mentioned effectively metabolic flexibility. I've got an entire episode with Dr. Mike T. Nelson, who's one of the world's leading guys on that. If you guys are interested in, the fat fueling versus carb fueling, that's a masterclass. And I've had Joel Jameson on he's one of the best in the world at conditioning modalities, energy system stuff. So, and then Dr. Alyssa Olenek, who I mentioned earlier, that episode with her was probably in the low 320s. I don't have the exact number, but if you guys listening are interested in these specific topics, there's actually like specific masterclasses on this. Another one of the claims was that women have shorter anabolic windows, that they needed to consume carbs and protein within 30 to 45 minutes post-workout. Now, I thought we were kind of done with the anabolic window and one of the old beliefs out of the Arnold Joe Weider era. So what's the truth there?
We are until somebody resurrected it and resurrected it without good evidence. And the whole idea is that when you stimulate a muscle in a resistance training session, there is a period for 24, 48, 72 hours where there's a whole host of processes going on, from damage repair to muscle protein synthesis. And it's agreed, depending on the volume, that it's roughly complete within 2 to 3 days. The argument then, which was originally, is that you need the protein straight after the exercise because that's when you need it the most.
Mm.
This is an extremely well-studied area. Whereas in some of the other topics like exercising in the fasted state, for resistance training, there's 4 studies. For aerobic training, well, there's many more when you look at the metabolic literature, but there's not a whole host. When it comes to protein and protein timing, we've got a lot of literature. It's been studied since the 1990s. Since they were doing nitrogen balance, this kind of literature has been addressed. And it's on this mistake that you need protein straight after you stimulated the muscle. But when you look at the time course changes in muscle protein synthesis, that machinery is really not kicking in for a few hours. So the idea that you need this bolus of protein straight away makes sense to somebody with no training at all, where you've just exercised, so have it straight away. But that machinery isn't kicking in yet. It takes a long period of time. So experts who study this with the state-of-the-art measurements, who can measure protein synthesis, have concluded that it's not this narrow window, it's a whole garage door, which is the term that they use, that lasts days, not minutes. Even that being said, I wanted to find out if I'd missed some literature that females do have a unique period. And it was based on the idea of estrogen in females. And when I looked at the hyperlink, it was in ovary ectomized mice. So again, we've got, well, females are different. They've got a different estrogen response. And because of the effect of progesterone, which is catabolic, they need this really quickly, whereas men can delay it. And that was in ovary ectomized mice. So again, we see this reliance on the rodent literature when we've got human studies.
I mean, I'm comfortable saying that men and women are more similar to each other than mice and humans are to each other, right? Like, I think mice are a bit more different. I'm comfortable with that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we need to include their training status, but as a rule, absolutely. But when I speak to researchers who do the sex-specific research, they prefer the phrase sex similarities, not sex differences, because it creates us up. Well, if there's such a difference in muscle fiber type, yes, between people, how does that change your results in the gym? Because the public who are confused want to know, what do I do? Because I've heard this. I was doing this, but I've heard this. And everything that I've been doing has been wrong. And that's why I'm not getting results. And usually we're not getting results because it's not a good program, or we're under fueling, or we're trying to do too much and not enough recovery. But that's a program design issue. Of course, if you lead me to do my own investments financially, I'm going to suck because I know nothing about it. I'll read a few things here and there, and I'm going to be terrible. It's the same thing. You take a lawyer or a finance person or a teacher and say, you're going to write your own program. Of course, it's not going to be good. And I think that explains a large part of why there's less than desired outcomes from the training response.
I'll go get another side note. I mean, this is me training people full-time in person for 15 years, and that includes, it's probably a 50-50 split, men and women. There are certain things that just could be chalked up to self-selection bias that we observe. There's anecdotal stuff. So I think one of the things we anecdotally see in practice is women seem to recover a little faster set to set than men do. They can handle higher volumes. But that can actually be, I think, relatively well explained by the fact that on average, women are using less absolute load. Therefore, it is less disruptive on nervous system and muscle tissue. But again, some of that's just self-selection bias that women, I found on average, it's not exclusive, just prefer to train that way. They'll do supersets more. They'll work a little quicker between their sets. You know, is that accurate?
A good coach will observe what people gravitate to, or the feedback that they give you. And if you do a training workout that has too much muscle groups that they don't really want and not enough in areas that they do want, or you do a lot of exercises versus 4 or 5 exercises, they will give the feedback to say, hey, I really enjoyed that workout. And then you note, oh, it was 12 exercises and they moved really quickly and so forth. Where clients buy into a program, I think, is really important and underappreciated. But there's considerable inter-individual differences. But there's also training experience. In any client that I work with who has an extensive history of endurance training, their ability to recover between sets and exercises and between days is phenomenal. So the good runners and good cyclists, they could rest 45 seconds between failure exercise and still do the same work output. Whereas some of the guys and girls who just lift weights might need 2.5, 3 minutes. There's so much that goes into that, but you can't give a blanket recommendation because you are a female and because you've got better mitochondrial efficiency or more slow twitch fibers, you should recover faster. It just doesn't work that way.
My other favorite thing about self-selection bias, the example I often use is yoga. So there's the direction of things. Statistically, I'm pretty confident that women vastly do more yoga than men, right? But what do people tend to gravitate to? It's like who goes for sprinting versus marathon running, and that may be fiber type, but it's oftentimes genetic build and genetic predisposition. We tend to go towards things we're good at. On average, women seem to be more joint mobile, more flexible than men. So therefore, what are they going to be good at and enjoy? A pursuit that is about mobility and flexibility. So do I love yoga as a modality for people? Absolutely. I think it's actually fantastic for many reasons. But it also makes sense to me that the people who are biasing towards it already have a predisposition towards mobility. So therefore they feel good doing it. Does that make sense?
I completely agree. And we have to work with the client in front of us because so many of my female clients gravitate towards yoga. I need to ensure that they've got the strength at that end range and also address the areas that yoga doesn't address. Because it is a body weight endeavor, by definition, there'll be areas and movements that they just don't do in that specific type of practice that they're doing. And therefore we add it. But we're always adding strength and load at that end range. And it's astonishing what these females can do in terms of range of motion and load when they apply a progressive overload to it in ranges that they can do every day in yoga, but they've never been adding progressively overloaded weights.
Makes sense. All right. The fourth claim that I pulled out of all this stuff, and this actually alludes to what I said earlier about the lower rep training, is that women should focus like almost exclusively on, and I may not be getting the exact quotations right, so you seem to know them. Focus on lifting very heavy with sets between 3 to 5 rep range. And of course, we're trying to build muscle. Then I presume that the intent was that this is to near failure, which means that's a very heavy load. And again, I believe the suggestion was that women were supposed to exclusively train this way. Is there, again, any evidence to suggest this is good for women?
It's these blanket phrases that are the best for. The best training for women is this. And that same individual has said that the higher reps, 12 to 15, don't do anything for females. They just create stress and metabolic damage. But the best way for a female to train is with 3 to 5 reps at 80% of 1 RM. You know as well as I do that 80% of 1 RM is not 3 to 5 repetitions. And that just makes me think, well, perhaps this is somebody a little bit out of their depth, making claims because of estrogen and because of fiber types that females need to target their fast twitch fibers. That argument about 3 to 5 reps is female specific because of fast twitch, having less fast twitch fibers, but it's also given to peri and post-menopausal women because of the effect of estrogen. So the individual in question says, because estrogen is no longer actively present, paraphrasing, you need to do what estrogen was doing and lift heavy weights because you're losing your fast twitch fibers. And it just smacks me as someone who might not be fully aware of the literature because you use your fast twitch on an effort based, not on a rep based. This is a really old way of viewing resistance training, that fast twitch is under 6 reps and slow twitch is more than 10. That's essentially what she's saying. But as we well know, when you look at the work from Schoenfeld and Phillips, that at task failure, at 30 reps, 20 reps, 15 reps, you get to your fast twitch. You get to them in a slightly different manner. The different fatigue mechanisms are building up. But ultimately, at that last few repetitions, you're using fast twitch fibers. So they're truly bizarre claims that the only way I can think about it is that you're just trying to defend a brand rather than looking at what science tells us how we use muscle fibers. So that's where I land on this, is that you can use heavy, but you can also use moderate and light in a well-designed periodized program. It brings us back to the point we made earlier, Andrew, and that is, if you've always been doing toning exercises and group exercise and you start lifting heavier, you will see an improvement because of the variety. And a good coach would vary the loads over the years based on your goals and your joint structures and your fear associated with heavy lifting to make sure that all different rep zones hit the muscle and the tendons and the ligaments and the bones in different ways.
I love the idea of women feeling confident and strong to do relatively heavy lifting. And certain exercises, I think, are better suited to maybe 3 to 5 reps to near failure. If someone's technique's quite good with deadlifting, squatting, maybe bench pressing, certain other things, I think that works really well. And one of my arguments, and it goes not just to women, but to this suggestion that you need to train in this almost like 4 to 6 rep range. It's the only thing that's effective for building muscle, which I think is complete nonsense, and I don't even entertain this. It's like there are certain exercises, shoulder laterals, curls, any other number of things that just from a practical standpoint, these don't work. And I think there's a lot of talking heads who are online, big brand online. They don't actually coach a lot of people. They certainly don't coach people in person or haven't coached anybody in person for a long time. And there are good people who don't do that anymore. But it's like, you're not working with people. One of my clients earlier, she's newer. She's getting great results. She definitely wants no part of like lifting super heavy for low reps. She's not there yet. I gradually give her heavier stuff and we little tug of war on it. She's getting great results. She's liking it. But, like I just can't say to her, all right, we're going to do 5 reps of this heavy. And of course, the weight that I hand her is going to be heavy relative to her. She's going to just refuse it outright, right? So there's the real practical implication of working with the person in front of you, which you alluded to earlier.
Absolutely. And we've got the coaching framework, but we've also got the science framework. It doesn't matter what age bracket you look at for males and females, whether they're in their 40s, 50s, 60s, is that males and females increase muscle hypertrophy and strength with moderate rep loads as long as you're working with a high degree of effort. It's the idea that because of estrogen or the lack of estrogen, that females therefore need a unique prescription is not scientifically based. We've got meta-analyses that use moderate loads and show an increase in muscle mass in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And I'm always wondering, how is the public ever going to know? And I think you made this point, is the person giving the advice and subject matter expert working with these people? Or do they just give advice? And that's a really easy way, because there is an orthopedic surgeon who's doing the rounds, giving advice on the best exercise for visceral fats, the best exercise for bone mineral density, the best exercise for muscle mass. And you look at these prescriptions and they're 4 sets of 4 reps at 80 to 85% of 1 RM, which is so far away from failure, so far away from effort. But this person does not work with people one-on-one in the exercise setting, isn't a trained exercise scientist, doesn't have a coaching qualification, but is a doctor. That should be the alarm bell for the public to say, well, me, the coach, I'm not going to walk into the surgery and say, just take a little bit off that meniscus there to the left. That's the best thing for that person's knee. We don't do that. We just say the best exercise for bone density based on the meta-analyses that we have is from 1 rep up to 18 reps. We've got this in meta-analyses. We should stay in our lanes and give advice specific to our training. And I think the public would be really best served when they hear conflicting advice. Is this the best thing for bone? Who's giving it? Is it a coach who works with bone density, or is it somebody who's trained in a completely different field?
And this is challenging. I definitely want to dive into this because we also I've had Amanda Thebe on. She's been fantastic. Again, Dr. Lauren Colenso sample, just some of the women who are very smart when it comes to, let's say, the research when it comes to menopause, perimenopausal stuff, women's hormones. But we have doctors who have positioned themselves for years as authorities on menopause. Now, I'm going to give a big shout out to Dr. Jen Gunter. She's been great. I think everybody should follow her if you're really interested in this topic, because she tends to then go and call out, in a way, the other people who are saying the things that are questionable. But there was a very popular big name in that space recently, and you probably know the exact claim because I don't have it written here, but there was something about starting HRT early for women was seeing, a 60% decrease in the incidence of a bunch of major diseases, like I think cancer. And Jen and some other people right away jumped on this. Like, this is not at all what was presented in the evidence. So can you speak to that?
There were 2 viral claims that came out in the same week, and it coincided with a conference. And at conferences, for those who aren't familiar, it gives researchers and student researchers a place to put an abstract before the paper's been written up and then put in. So it's really early literature. And people love this at conferences. You walk into a conference room and there's abstracts and the researcher is there talking about their findings. This was an abstract at a conference that had not been written up yet, had not been subject to peer review. It's great, but you can't talk about that until it's published. And everyone in science knows this. If you're making a claim and you link an abstract at a conference, then you will be called immediately by other academics to say, hold on, that's not public yet. That needs to be subject to peer review. That's how science works. And some of the big names on big platforms had breaking news. The brain is eating itself if it's not doing this, and there's reduction in cancer here. Now, that may well be true, but it should be verified. It should be done by other labs. And it should at least, at the very minimum, be published, written up and published. Now, it just so happens that the primary author, the PI on that paper, has contacted these big names and said, this is an abstract and it's not breaking news yet. We need to wait for its publication. And as of this recording, all of the big names have not responded to that, nor retracted, because these people are calling for a retraction. You can't say breaking news to the public yet until it's actually published. And they haven't. And I think this is part of the issue, is that you can say whatever you want. And because you've got 1 million plus people, they will believe that because they believe and trust you. And scientists like Jen Gunter or Stu Phillips will say, it's not ready yet. You cannot say breaking news. And they're just not replying. And I think that's part of the issue here, is at least engage with other academics.
This raises a dynamic, and a lens that I use to vet people as credible authorities. And this is how you hit my radar a while ago and then start diving into your media, is the fact that you are collaborating with and working with people that I know and trust to be reliable authorities as subject matter experts. I mean, we said a lot of those names very early on in this, but the inverse is also true. You have these figures, and some of them actually have credential and what looks like real authority to the average person. They're doctors or PhDs, and it may even be within the realm of their education. They certainly tend to wander outside of it, but they're part of a network that platform and support each other. So if someone's watching and they see this popular menopause doctor and this popular menopause doctor and this popular nutrition influencer, they're all sharing and supporting each other, it looks like a credible network. So how does the person who's trying to dissect it, you and I understand the bias, we understand the selection criteria. And I think most people listening are probably pretty good at knowing who's reliable, but how does the everyday person, the average person, decipher which network is the good one and which one is questionable?
It is really challenging because of these titles, doctor, whether they're medical doctor or scientific doctor. Two questions have to be asked. Is your area of expertise what you're talking about? Or is your area of expertise in your training X, but you've spent your whole career working in Y? And for some of them, it might be. They might be a medical doctor working in menopause, and that's, you see patients all the time. Then you should be talking about that and potentially not about exercise, because that's not your training. Where most of, I'm going to say 90+% of the confusion comes in our industry of fitness. It comes from a hydration expert, environmental hydration expert, who is an expert in that. That was her PhD, but is not a trained strength and conditioning expert, or an endurance expert. It is an endurance athlete historically, but not a coach. And the reason why I say that is that the advice is so out of line with what best practice coaching is. It's not supported by the science, such that they have to resort to rodent literature to support their claim and publicly say in writing, I only use human studies and interpret these clearly, fairly, and accurately. That is plainly not true. And the public gets really confused because they're saying this. But what does the rest of the field think? And I think that's part of the framework as well, is that if the scientists who are doing the work don't agree, let's just take mitochondria, for example, that females need to do more of this high intensity work and less low intensity. I spoke to David Bishop, who is regarded as one of the top mitochondrial researchers on the planet. And I asked him this direct question. Is there a difference in female response to different intensities? Do females need more of this? And he said, absolutely not. Is that we see males and females respond similarly to every intensity, providing it is a well-designed program. Now, that's a world expert in mitochondria. And if somebody like that knows the literature back to front and has contributed to it and says there are no sex differences, then why are we listening to someone who's never done mitochondrial research, never trained anyone, isn't trained in it at all, and is giving advice? I think that would help the public realize, well, they're maybe not qualified to give these recommendations.
But the person has a larger number in front of their social media following, which
right.
isn't, and you know what's funny? People say that, but it's also not a disqualifier either. You still have to go deeper, but it's just not a automatic qualifier. But that person is also on the biggest podcast. And we now know that the biggest podcasts tend to cycle through a network of these figures that will go on and say things that turn out great clips. Like one of the inspirations behind a bit of a shift in this podcast about 100 episodes ago, a lot of it was very geared towards coaches and career development. It's benefited me greatly. And I always enjoy the relationship and the chance to actually get face-to-face time with someone like yourself. But I wanted something that was better, going to credible authorities and experts. Just recently I recorded with Dr. Dwayne Jackson, who is a PhD, and Dwayne is very well liked and respected in the evidence-based world, but his PhD was actually in peptides. We hear so much overblown stuff from definitely people who are not qualified this stuff on peptides, a lot of hype, and there's even some cynicism. But Dwayne is a guy who actually was able to speak to the nuance of it and where the data is coming from, and it turned out to be quite fantastic as an example. But even I look at it and go, I'll give you another example. To your point about I like what you said about, is someone educated in X, but if they practice in Y for a really long time? My good friend, Brad Dieter, he's been on for a while. He's one of the owners of Macros Inc. And his PhD is in exercise science or something very close to that. But he's actually one of the best nutritional authorities, and he's done extensive work there. So I'm currently doing the Macros Inc. There's a nutrition certification they just launched, right? And yeah, I trust Brad explicitly on nutrition. But again, I have the filter to know that. But so sometimes there are people who their education is actually specifically in one place, but they've developed great expertise, evidence-based expertise elsewhere. So I don't think there's a clear qualifying criteria here. And I think it just means critical lens, gather data. And I think the best thing is if you can find a network of credible, reliable authorities, and then you look at who are they collaborating with, who are they interacting with, and does the community seem to support that individual? That's one of my favorite ways of vetting someone's credibility.
I think that's a great idea. And I would just add to that is if you're confused about the advice when it comes to health and fitness, nutrition, training, or anything that goes into your exercise, and you're confused, it's helpful to know that coaches and scientists are not confused at all. Yes, there's differences, there's preferences, there's slightly different ways of doing things, but on the big things, there is zero confusion at all. And that means if somebody is saying something to confuse you, that everything you've heard is wrong, that females require differences for fueling, for carb intake, for protein timing, with your rep selection, with your intensity of aerobic exercise, with fasting, that's different to what you have heard or done. Check, is that in line with what the scientists who are doing the work and the coaches who work with individuals across a large scale? If they think differently, then chances are that lone voice, and it is a lone voice, there's no one else who thinks this way, that person would never present at a conference, never at the NSCA, never at the ACSM, never at any of the IOC conferences, because that viewpoint, it's not formed by science or coaching. So if you're confused because somebody's supporting a brand and a catchphrase and not honestly saying, well, what does coaches say about this? Maybe I should go and speak to them.
This episode is brought to you by Just Bite Me Meals. I work long days and I won't compromise my client experience or sacrifice my workout, sleep, or nutrition. So I needed a quality and reliable meal prep service so I could save time on cooking and shopping and have more time for the stuff that matters. Net out the cost of groceries and the service isn't as much as you might think, and regular impulsive food delivery apps, eating out, that costs way more anyway. I get more meal variety and less dishes to clean, and I've been referring clients to Just Bite Me meals for a long time, and I recently started ordering myself. Food is great. The beef brisket tacos are my favorite so far, and there's a lot of menu choice. Your calories and macros are listed. The portions are great. You can order custom meals. They deliver to your door, or you can pick up from their storefront. And I'm sorry to listeners outside of Alberta, but Just Bite Me Meals is currently just in Edmonton, Calgary, Grand Prairie, and Fort McMurray. Ordering from Just Bite Me Meals made my life easier instantly. And you can get 10% off on all your orders using my code, Andrew Coates Fitness, all caps, on their website. That's Andrew Coates Fitness, all capitals, or go to the link and the code in the show notes.
There's another dimension I just thought of, and it's a side note, but I think it's relevant. Almost everything we talk about here, I do not think exists within the, let's call it the culture war, socio-political, ideological sphere, right? So there's no dimension of that for any of this, but there are some pieces, usually nutrition, that enter there. And if you can recognize, okay, there's some sort of ideological investment from the people talking about it. Carnivore dieting, absolutely, and vegan dieting, they tend to have that aspect a little bit. Seed oils is a very good example. We tend to see, and people have strong feelings about that. But when you have a dimension of nutrition, and I can't think of anything off the top of my head that is going to be training necessarily. They have their own ideologies, like low volume, high volume,
Right.
methodologies, that sort of stuff, right? Within the physio world, there's definitely ideologies, but they're not socio-political. But when you have a socio-political side on something, I also think approach that with a little caution too, because sometimes it's actually more about that than it is the evidence. And again, I think seed oils are a great example of that.
Absolutely. I think nutrition is fraught with that worldview, and exercise a little bit less. But I think what is being introduced is that there are hormonal sex differences or neurosignaling pathways that are different between genders. And that should be respected if you want to get the most out of your training. And I think where it becomes a little hard to stomach is that women have been force-fed programs designed for men, and there's no studies in women. And this fuels the anger of, well, we're so underrepresented and we don't know anything, and you're making us do your programs because you're a guy and you're not listening to us. And I find this as a coach really challenging, because women have been studied in resistance training since 1973. And we've got, just in resistance training alone, about 18,000 PubMed studies, of which women are about 40 to 45%. There's also non-PubMed referenced papers like the Journal of Strength and Conditioning with the NSCA. That's not on PubMed. So that's excluding all of those papers. That's a pretty large number since 1973 to be able to draw some conclusions. In other words, I don't like hearing this statement, because it comes from somewhere, that women are utterly unrepresented, unstudied, we don't know anything, and because of our hormones, we need something different. If this was the case in every study since 1973, we would see a marked response. But coaches would have already worked this out well before that, and they would have said, well, we discover that females actually need 30 seconds rest, not 2 minutes. They need higher loading, because we don't know what it is, because they didn't know what it was in the 70s. But this would have all been borne out, and we just don't see that at all. In other words, we're just seeing this jumping on of the bandwagon of anger that women are unrepresented and we don't know anything about them, and they've just been treated like men. And the irony here is that historically, women have been given this advice that you should tone and you should sculpt and you should do the pink dumbbells and you should do the abductions with body weight. And you still see that at the gyms today. And then a voice comes and says, well, you're females and you need female specific programs. You need to lift heavy shit. Well, hang on, that's what the men are doing. So you're saying that you should train like a man, right? if you want to look at it like this, and we don't, but isn't that ironic?
It is. And I think it comes back to, again, if you can make the claim that, oh, there's no research on women, which you pretty much said is a false narrative, right? There is lots, but sure, we could always benefit from more, but it's still a false narrative, that it justifies these mechanistic claims that otherwise are well supported by good research, right?
Yeah. And it is across the board, whether you look at females have more slow twitch fiber. If females are underrepresented and we haven't been studied, how do we know that they've got more slow twitch fibers. And that's an area of debate and controversy, depending on which fiber you look at, the training status of the individual, because you can morph those fiber types, and the sample group. It doesn't tell us, even if it were true, and that's debatable, but even if it were true, it doesn't tell you how you train, because coaches won't give a female this rep range because they've got 51% slow twitch in their vastus lateralis. It's silly. And when you say it out loud, oh yeah, of course that makes sense. Just because we might burn X amount of carb greater, 2% carb greater, or we're better fat burner in this zone, or we've got more slow twitch. You don't change the training process. The training process is driven by goals, not by physiology. And I think that, again, is also a huge mistake. Could only be made by somebody who is not a coach.
This has been incredible, really enlightening. I think we got time for one more thing, and I definitely want to hit on this. So I think, yeah, I had Dr. Lauren Colenso Semple. She talked about the myths around weighted vests, but is there an optimal or at least practical evidence-based approach to women training for improved bone health as they age? And again, you could also couch this as, is there anything different than we would see in the way we would train aging male populations?
I think that's a great way of looking at it. And that is, if a male and female in the same age bracket, same training history, were to do the same program, would you see markedly divergent responses? Or does it make life really easy and you can go and train with your partner and do the same thing and get the same results? What we look at in interpreting studies is what the individual difference is. And that is so much greater than what the sex difference is in terms of response. That's point one. Point two, though, when you look at the literature, and there is a lot of studies on bone mineral density. In post-menopausal women alone and bone mineral density, there's more than 850 studies. We've got a lot. In fact, if there's one group that have been really well studied, it's post-menopausal women and bone mineral density. And the most recent meta-analysis, which is 2 months ago, has up to 18 reps they talk in percentages of 1 RM, which is about 18 reps if you look at Nuzo's 1 RM continuum, down to very heavy lifting if you look at the Lift More studies. In other words, it gives men and women this huge range of loading to work with based on your history. The concern that coaches have is the idea that we can look at the Lift More trial, which did 5 sets of 5 of some major compound movements and a jump off the chin-up bar. So finished the chin-ups and then landed with stiff knees. That was compared to nothing. The home-based training was designed, and it says in the paper, to not target bone. So it was body weight this and body weight that, but it was essentially nothing. And you can't therefore make the claim that heavy lifting is superior. It just is effective. And that's great news. We now have data that is from low reps to high reps as long as you work with effort. And that is great because now we can tailor make the program to where you are in your journey. I have numerous people who start lifting weights in their 70s, never lifted weights before. And they hear this news, I should be lifting heavy. So, no, not yet. Put the brakes on. You got to earn the right to do that stuff. And when you look at the real pioneers of strength training for older individuals, especially with falls prevention, fragility fractures, bone mineral density, people like Maria Fiatero and Singh, they've been doing this since the 1980s. They just do around 8 repetitions on machines, leg press, leg extensions, chest press, rows, and some calf work. And they also do triceps because that's helpful for getting up out of chairs. It's really simple. And they just progressively overload. There's nothing complex there at all. And that's when you look to what they're doing in strong medicine and have been doing it for decades, and what coaches doing, working with overactive 50s. You use a variety of reps, you work with effort, and you can target the bone side of interest. So if a DEXA scan says it's femur or lumbar, or you've had a full scan and it looks at the wrist, for example, we can target the program based on the exercise selection, and we just vary the loading. But it's not like 4 sets of 4 is superior. It's just one model within many models.
And you alluded to this, the training experience, the skill level, having worked with real people, including a lot of older adults, someone who is new to lifting in their 60s or 70s, the last fucking thing I'm going to be doing is taking them early in the program and doing something in a 3 to 5 rep range to near failure with the kind of load you'd need to be near failure. That's
Right.
that's dangerous. And I'm sorry, in
Yeah,
that
and it should be
context,
recognized. Yeah, yeah, it should be called for what it is. When I do consults with people who call in and we try and problem solve the injuries and how it happened, it was, well, I took up sprinting and I tore my hamstring. I hurt my back doing 5 sets of 5 of a deadlift. And then when you poke a little deeper, what were you doing previously? It was nothing remotely that would prepare the body to do such training. And I would imagine that the proponents, maybe not the orthopedic surgeon because they're not a coach and they don't understand the framework, but the other big names, they would understand you start with higher reps and lower loads and you periodize, but that's not being communicated effectively enough to the public, to their audience, because they hear that women must do this. This is the best for bone. This is the best for muscle. If you're perimenopause, the best exercise is sprinting and HIIT training. They're the ones who get those sound bites and run with it. And that should be recognized for what it is. And that's just downright bad advice.
one quick side tangent, and I've seen this a lot. Threads is such a terrible social media platform for a lot of bad hot takes, but one of the things I routinely see is women complaining about men who have female-only training programs. And funny, I don't take it personally. I actually have a women's online group program. It was started with a former female partner coach of mine who just decided to go do her own thing, but my community loves it, so I continue on with it. I don't brand myself as a female-centric coach, but some women have issues with this. And to me, it's like, I mean, I think that expertise is expertise. A lot of women just prefer what they like. But again, I think that the pushback against men training women in this context just creates room for more of these same figures who will make all these sort of like very female specific training claims, but they're almost incompatible, because then if there are people claiming that there are all these specific protocols for women, then, and I don't think it's the same people complaining about it, how can you complain about female centric programs? And I think ultimately, here's a real point I want to make is female programs oftentimes is about a community that women self-select to be in, as opposed to the specifics of, oh, there's all this different physiology that you must cater to. I think there's a self-selection bias. Women on average seem to like training lower body a little bit more. Women on average tend to like these higher rep ranges.
But Andrew, these are preferences. They're not
Yeah.
steeped in physiological differences. And absolutely, I don't do a lot of direct arm with my women, but I do a lot more lower body. And because of that, they habituate and can accomplish stunning feats of volume and frequency when it comes to the lower body, because that's their focus area. But that's a preference issue. That's not a physiological issue.
Fantastic. Everybody can follow you on Instagram at Tony Boutagy. That's Boutagy. Is there anywhere else you want to send people?
No, that's it. I have a website where I have my courses, education courses that are around fat loss and programming and training females. But I mainly am on Instagram.
Fantastic. This has been incredible. Everything I was hoping for. Everybody listening, please go follow Tony. His media is great. And then you can see the people that he is collaborating with and highlighting. You do a wonderful job of that. These are also great people. So like we talked about earlier, how to filter who to trust. And I know it's challenging. So thank you so much. And for everybody listening, this is one of those episodes where you're going to have people in your world who you know are consuming a lot of different media when it comes to women's hormonal health, perimenopause, menopause. Share this with them. This is probably going to be the thing that they need to hear. So you can help me grow. Go support Tony. Tony, thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew.